Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean there's not some strange stuff going on out there.
Do you all remember the BP oil spill of 2010, where an estimated 210 million gallons of oil was spilled in the Gulf of Mexico? It's one of those things that kind of came and went, even though it was the worst oil spill in the history of the divided states of Zombieland. But just like any and every event that occurs in this world, it was quickly forgotten by the population of deliberately dumbed down individuals that only seem to care about the newest television shows and their next purchase of their favorite drink from Starbucks. Well, the consequences of that oil spill and the use of a highly toxic oil dispersant called COREXIT have left the Gulf suffering ever since.
On April 20th, 2010, a powerful explosion rocks the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico. It leads to what will become America's largest oil spill. 130 liters per second gush from a leak 1,500 meters below the surface, 400,000 liters per hour. As the true extent of the spill became clear, BP sought federal approval to deploy massive amounts of chemical oil dispersants. It was hoped the unprecedented move would keep the crude from reaching the coast. The dispersant chosen by BP is banned in Europe. Although BP's headquarters are located in Europe, regulators in the US are less strict, and BP gets the go-ahead for the dispersant.
We are applying a chemical, a safe chemical, to disperse the oil. And on this incident so far, we've already dispersed more dispersant than has ever been done in the cumulative oil spill responses in the history of the industry.
2 months later, the oil still gushes into the deep sea, affecting a surface area the size of Portugal. Public pressure builds up. BP and the Coast Guard react by publishing these images, hoping to keep control of the spin. The chemical dispersant is called COREXIT, as in corrects it. The manufacturer claims it's effective. That's what BP hopes. More than 4 million liters of COREXIT are deployed, according to official numbers. The petroleum industry has come to like dispersants. Simply spray them onto the surface, and the oil seems to disappear.
When you look at the Center for Disease Control's overview of COREXIT, it says this: dispersants are specially designed oil spill products that are composed of detergent-like surfactants in low toxicity solvents. Dispersants do not remove oil from the water, but instead break the oil slick into small droplets. These droplets disperse into the water and are further broken down by nature. Well, how about that? Isn't that special? See, that's the big lie right there. The oil droplets are not further broken down by nature, but absorbed by it and humans.
We are in the Water Quality Laboratory at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Right now on the magnetic stirrer, I've got a bottle of clean seawater collected from the Florida Keys just a couple of weeks ago. And what we're going to do is we're going to add about 1 milliliter, about 1/3 of 1% of one of BP's crude oils from its spill off of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico. So once we add that, we'll start the clock. And take a look at what happens once that oil gets into the water. If you look carefully, you can see that the oil is forming a large number of small droplets being spun about by the magnetic stirrer. So we'll let that go for about a minute to stir up. Okay, that's 60 seconds. We'll stop the stirrer bar, and very slowly the oil droplets that are mixed in with the seawater. They make their way to the surface, just like they would from, say, a leaking underwater oil well in the Gulf of Mexico. That's 20 seconds. Most of the droplets, even though they're small, start to reach the surface. And you can see a small slick of oil appearing, half a minute. Already when you're looking, you can see that the water's fairly clear. 40 seconds. So now what we're going to do is add a little bit of dispersant. This is made by Nalco. This is COREXIT 9500A. We're going to add it about 1 part in 25 compared to the oil. That's 40 microliters if you're keeping track. And what this lets us do is see what happens to the oil and how it behaves differently once we add some dispersant. The first thing that happens, you can see that the oil instantly races to the sides of the glass. And now it's starting to adhere to the glass. Let's turn the stirrer back on. It's been about 1.5 minutes since we first stopped that stirrer the first time. And we'll let that mix for a minute, just like we did before. See if there are any differences. Okay, now like before, we've let it stir for about half a minute. We'll stop the stir bar, and we'll see if we notice anything different when you add a little bit of dispersant to BP's crude oil versus just the crude oil alone. Now this time when we stop the stirrer, when we have a mixture of dispersant and crude oil, instead of the crude oil going right back to the surface, this time much of it stays in the water itself. The water stays discolored. Many of the toxic compounds that are in the oil remain in the water instead of moving back to the surface where they could be skimmed. What's happening now is, because we're getting about 35 times more of the most toxic hydrocarbons in the crude oil staying in the water column, we're finding that the toxicity of the water is actually increased by adding dispersant to the crude oil. If the crude oil hadn't had dispersant in it at all, we would have far fewer of these most toxic compounds in the water column.
And here's what the developers of COREXIT say about it.
BP says COREXIT is the most effective option to clean up the huge spill. Eyewitness News anchor Art Rascone is learning more about it and got some answers from developers about its safety.
We take some of the dispersant. This is the COREXIT 9500.
This is the dispersant being used just about everywhere in the Gulf.
What we do, we take some crude oil and we put it on top of the water.
The reaction after only a couple of drops of the chemical on the oil is almost immediate.
What you'll see there, that ping indicates how quickly the dispersant molecules get to that region between the oil and the water, and that is absolutely key. For an effective dispersant, you want it to get to that interface very quickly, because that allows the dispersant to start working extremely quickly.
There are questions, however, about the toxicity of this chemical. Is it dangerous to sea life and humans? The company insists it's safe.
The toxicity of this particular product is at least 25 times less toxic than common dishwashing soap that everybody uses in their house on a day-to-day basis. We then apply some wave action to this using this little shaker.
Simulating the waves of the sea, the dispersant breaks up the oil into tiny droplets, which will eventually decompose. Without the dispersant, the oil just sits on the surface.
The oil is extremely persistent on the surface. And here it is finally dispersed.
So it's obviously safe, right? Let's find out.
Dr. Ricky Ott has been brought in. She's a marine toxicologist. Until 1990, Ott was working in Alaska's commercial fishing trade. But the Exxon Valdez oil spill made her change careers. She became a toxicologist, specializing in the side effects of COREXIT.
The industry likes to say the oil will miraculously be eaten by, bacteria and disappear. Bacteria are very good at eating alkanes. These are straight chain carbons that are hitched together much like a train with different cars, the bacteria can just be like Pac-Man and go chomp, 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 and eat one alkane, carbon after another until the oil, in fact, does disappear. The problem is, what the mess that's in the Gulf is alkanes and aromatics.
Even though bacteria break down long-chain oil molecules, they aren't effective against cyclic ones. These remain in the water, which was discovered following a 1968 oil accident. The polycyclic oil molecules are still there.
And what happened during Exxon Valdez was we also used COREXIT 9527, which is being used here in the Gulf. And COREXIT 9527 contains a human health hazard. It breaks apart blood and breaks down blood cells, causes kidney damage, liver damage, blood disorders, and it even kills babies in the womb. It's a fetal toxin. I mean, this is a nasty chemical. When the oil industry says these dispersants are non-toxic, what they mean is they're non-toxic based on outdated 1970s era bioassays. The scientific community knows that dispersed oil is more toxic than not dispersed oil. And it knows that dispersants and dispersed oil are more toxic than oil alone. So what this chemical effectively does for the oil industry is it takes care of a public relation nightmare, which is oil all over the surface of the ocean, and pushes the oil instead down into the water column.
What is the deal here? They have sprayed 40 million people with poisonous dispersants. I had people all over my homeland sick, breaking out in rashes. A child gets a ringworm. Instead of it going away within a few days with a little bit of medicine, it covers her from shoulder to shoulder and all the way around her neck as it multiplies because the natural barrier on all of our skin is gone. I myself contracted a staph infection, had holes the size of pencils in the back of my legs. You know, I was down for 10 days. People don't realize this is going on. We have people down there with nosebleeds, upper respiratory problems. My husband's had brown shit leaking out of his ears for 4 months. The love of my life has brown liquid leaking out of his ears, and the doctors just keep giving him antibiotics and slapping him on the butt and sending him on his way.
That's peroxide. And I did the same thing that I'm doing now when the back of my legs broke out.
I went to a skin disease specialist, and he told me that my rash, that it is staph infection. I've had to stay here. I can't be outside in the heat at all. Basically what I've had to use is cotton balls, gauze, band-aids, tape, betadine, triple antibiotic ointments, pain medicine.
I went out to see that full moon come up on the harvest moon, and that night when I got home, I had a major attack of my throat and head. It felt like knives were sticking in my throat, and my throat closed up. And ever since then, I have not been able to talk.
Your face appears to be quite swollen.
It's about 3 times its size, and so is my neck.
What's the bruising on your chest?
I don't know. It just appeared.
And is it only up high? Is it elsewhere?
No, it's down here too, all around my diaphragm. I have been on enough prednisone to kill a horse, and I have had 2 shots, and I've been on 4 different kinds of antibiotics, and nothing is touching this at all.
I was vomiting blood, urinating blood, passing blood in my stool. I was hallucinating.
Early on, I had sores and rashes that blew up on my arms that I couldn't get to heal.
This right here on my arms, it just started breaking me out, and I can bump either one of these dark marks in here, and it just starts bleeding.
The respected Journal of Environmental Pollution has published a study into the biological effects of the Deepwater disaster. It found when COREXIT 9500 and oil are mixed, toxicity increases up to 52-fold.
So, from a toxicology perspective, this is really awful because COREXIT and the dispersed oil are much more toxic together than either alone, and usually the exposure is a combined exposure. The dispersants, as I was saying, their job is to break down the lipid membrane. The solvents in them do that very efficiently. So they break down lipid membranes in our body, starting with the cells of the skin, the cells of organs. So it actually hastens oil getting into the body easily and readily. Oil contains hundreds of hydrocarbon compounds and other compounds that are toxic to every organ in the body. And so with the dispersants combined, you have this very synergistic combined toxicity.
Disturbing find in the Hamptons, a canal full of tens of thousands of dead fish.
Dead fish are washing up on beaches from Pinellas County down to the southern tip of Sarasota County.
Thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, maybe even more, dead fish.
Hundreds of thousands of dead fish were seen floating along the shoreline in the seas off Mullaitivu.
Hundreds of dead fish now washing ashore.
Thousands of dead fish and other marine life have been washing up ashore on a beach in southwest Nova Scotia.
They made a movie about this incident called Deepwater Horizon. And guess what? None of this stuff about COREXIT and the people affected by it were in it. Of course, right? It was basically a commercial for BP and pure propaganda that makes some BP employees look like heroes while catering to the average moviegoer's love of explosions and over-the-top action. It's not just the Gulf of Mexico that will be affected in the long run. Being that the oceans of the world are all connected and currents flow in every direction, this COREXIT stuff will devastate our world. The coral reefs are already dying. These once thriving ecosystems are quickly becoming underwater ghost towns. This is absolutely unacceptable, and just like 9/11, we can never forget about this. We can't just keep letting these things go. The powers that should not be are only powers because we let them be. The problem is that so many people in this world just want their iPhone. They just want their video games and their TV. They just want to see the next superhero movie so they can talk about it with everyone they know on Facebook while eating a McDonald's cheeseburger and slamming a Coca-Cola. People just want to be comfortable. And it's because of people like that that some things will never change. But we shall not lose hope, and we shall never surrender. That's all I got. I just wanted to shine some more light on this. Around the time of this incident, many people were making videos about it. And no longer. People are no longer worried about it. It's came, it's gone. The only people that are worried about it are the people that are still affected by it, that are still suffering from weird diseases and stuff like that. So I just wanted to touch on this myself. So thanks guys, much love, Truth Seekers, I'm out.
It freaks me out, it's driving me, it creeps me out, inside of me, can you pick me out? I'm going, gone. I feel like a fucking maniac in public. I feel like a fucking maniac in public.